Let's start with the first speaker for this entire section on online safety, where it's our great honor to have amongst us today Dr. Kersi Chavda. Dr. Kersi Chavda has been in the field of psychiatry since 35 years, currently chair of the task force of the Indian Psychiatry Society on school psychiatry and counseling, as well as on the panel of the task force of the IPS on ethical boundaries between client and the doctor. Dr. Chavda is also an integral part of the panel of the task force of the Indian Psychiatry Society on developmental disorders. Dr. Chavda is a long-time consultant in the psychiatry department at Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital and Centre, the PD National Hinduja National Hospital and the Hinduja National Hospital in Khar. Dr. Chavda is going to talk to us today about helping kids stay safe on the net, a mental health perspective. Welcome, Dr. Chavda.
We've seen that the past decade has shown rapid development and exponential growth in the use of computer-based communication and the sharing of information via the net. Certainly there are an incredible amount of benefits through this, but till recently there's been very little recognition of the dangers associated with such technology. And coming from a generation where a mouse was actually a rodent which women saw and started screaming, I mean, just about 25 years ago, who would have thought that this has become such an important and integral part of our lives today? In fact, in our psychiatric diagnosis, we've actually started now having a diagnostic category of media addiction, where you have especially kids or young teenagers getting so addicted to the use of media that it's almost as if they were on drugs. And you've got to get them off. Sometimes you have to admit them, give them medication and things like that. So when we are speaking about online problems, it has now become a very major issue. Today's kids have wide access to the internet via mobiles, laptops, tablets, desktops, and other devices. And I was a little startled when I was trying to get the latest number. In India, it is estimated that 134 million kids have access to mobiles. And that's a huge number. This enables the sharing of useful learning material, but also the exposure to cyberbullying, sexual predation, and other crimes. I remember talking to a distraught parent of a kid who was consumed with watching porn. He said, I still remember getting Diwali crackers for my daughter with a fair warning that while they may add to a lot of fun, they may harm my child just as much. He said that he really wished our computers, mobile phones, and other digital devices also came with such warnings, as the scars that the net can leave on impressionable kids can make a lifetime to heal. This little girl had come, little meaning she was about 15, she had come to me by her mum, with her mum, and she was consumed with watching pornography, had then got into an obsessive compulsive mode because of the guilt associated with doing that, and had actually had a psychotic breakdown. There is now growing evidence that the net is a new medium through which some commonly recognized forms of child maltreatment, sexual and emotional abuse may be pursued. Unfortunately, the development and adoption of preventive measures may not have kept pace with the spread of the net as much as it should. What is actually happening? So when we talk of child sexual exploitation, the spread of the net allows easy and often private access to children, thus allowing for greater opportunities for the solicitation of children and the committing of abusive acts by offenders outside the family. There is now an increased opportunity for the sexual exploitation of kids and their increased access to offensive and age-inappropriate material through the net. When I had started off working as a counselor or as a therapist or whatever you might call it, many, many years ago, I used to work in schools because that's the only place where you can really get hands-on experience. And I remember when I used to talk, we used to have something called a zero-period hour where I would talk about things like single-parent families, death and divorce and stuff like that. And we'd also speak about what we would call Stranger Danger Day. So we used to have a whole day where we talk about the dangers associated with strangers trying to get close to you. Over a period of time, it became not only Stranger Day, because of course we all know that families and perpetrators of sexual acts very often to the largest possible extent, are actually within families or within the extended family or within friends. Today, when we are talking about stranger danger, we're talking about dangers associated with kids. There's a huge module which we've started now spending, in which we are actually talking to kids about the dangers associated with the net. And it just shows the paradigm shift that we are at. Is this sophistication in our society? I don't know. It's frightening. The net also facilitates the activities of offenders by providing a simple and quick means of communication, which allows the perpetrator to remain anonymous and or create false identities in a number of exploitative areas. For all of us working also with boys and girls who might have intellectual differences, who might not be absolutely intellectually average or above average, this is actually a little more frightening, because we always have, we have knowledge that the kid who might be having a problem with intelligence may not, and usually does not, have a problem with his sexual growth. Given the fact that disinhibition very often occurs because of the lack of intellectual control on your impulses in this age group, it becomes even more incumbent on us to do things with our special children so that they don't become even more at a risk for a person who has a deviously sexually inappropriate viewpoint. Solicitation of children. The sexual exploitation of children via the internet has become so prevalent that it is said to have become a serious problem. This was in a seminar which was done by End Child Prostitution and Trafficking as early as 2001, so that is 16 years ago. Why so? Because it provides both an easy access to children and a reduced risk of offenders of being identified. It provides an opportunity for offenders to remain anonymous or to misinterpret their identity or intent, leading a child to believe that he is talking with another child, a trusted friend, or a caring parent figure. Now, for all of us who are aware of some amounts of developmental aspects associated with child psychology, we do know that early teenage, middle teenage is associated with the formation of groups. So friends become really much more important than adults. And in the group, if you're chatting around and then you have access to chat rooms where outsiders who pretend to be the age of the child or who pretend to be extremely empathic and say your parents are horrible and let's do something together, if that happens, it becomes a major issue. The movement then becomes from a chat room to a mobile phone to an actual meeting. Exacerbation of such risks occur because parents' warning of stranger danger may not actually be triggered by kids meeting other kids on the net. So I'm a parent, I have an adult child now, so that's good. But if you're looking at the possibility that if I had a kid who was a kid, say in the teenage group, would I actually constantly tell him to be careful about people who he's meeting on the net? I probably would. Would he actually listen to me? He probably wouldn't. And that is one of the things that we see, that our kids always believe that we are a bunch of asses and that they have the answers to the universe. The problem is it does not always work out safely. Unless specifically mentioned, kids may not associate internet communication with unknown individuals as being potentially harmful. So I work in a number of schools, and one of the things we've now started is talking about cyber safety, especially in the classes from the 7th to the 10th, so that is about 12 years onwards. I have no doubt it should actually start at a younger age group, but at least we've started somewhere. Once again, just in the last 3 or 4 years. Do we get pedophile activities on the net? Yes, we do. As well as being used for direct sexual solicitation, the net is used by pedophiles to legitimize, reinforce, and facilitate their sexual inclinations. Contacts may be organized formally through people or sites, and these sites are actually called facilitators. Such sites provide support, advice, and encouragement. For example, they distribute material, technical advice, they allow for downloading of porn, etc. And chat rooms are used by pedophiles to indulge in sexual fantasies. A number are actually openly advertised as being devoted to the defense of adult-child sexual relationships, especially in the Western cities where there's an enormous amount of emphasis given on the rights of people, one of the things that they have talked about is that the adult should have the right to indulge in sexual activities or in his fantasies. And if we try to do something related to that in terms of restriction, it's considered to be impinging on his personal rights. This is changing now. Even abroad, child pornography is considered to be a crime. In India, it's a very big thing. Unfortunately, we have huge populations, and maybe the policing is not as intense and as good and as emphasized as it should be. Child pornography. Once again, I was a little startled to realize that there are estimates of about 14 million porn sites on the net, of which some carry an estimated 1 million porn images of children. The ready availability of child porn on the net has led to an increase in its demand, which in turn leads to the creation of new material. And that's very well known. If you don't have something, then you don't desire something, then the need doesn't really come about. If something is available which titillates the intellect or which titillates the baser aspects of your personality, it's not surprising that you need more and more of it. I remember when I was a teenager, the only access that we had to porn was actually Playboy magazines, which today are probably like Disney. They're so innocuous, considering the stuff that we see on the net. And sometimes I'm aghast. I know I was helping one of the kids do something. He had to do a project on snakes. So we just typed in black snakes, and a whole bunch of porn sites popped off, talking about snakes being penile objects and things like that. It's very frightening. And however much be the filters that we as parents and caregivers attempt to put onto it, first of all, our kids are smarter than us. Secondly, there's just more and more stuff which attempts to subvert whatever be the filters. So sometimes we really wonder whether we are fighting a losing battle. How was this material produced? We used to hope that there was only digital morphing, because it's very frightening to see caricatures and pictures of young kids, the so-called twinks or the so-called youngsters, in sexual poses, provocative, disgusting orgies, sadomasochism and stuff like that. When you see it happening to an 11-year-old kid on the screen, you feel like bringing up. Unfortunately, digital technology has made it now easier and safer to use kids for the production of porn and to electronically transmit their material without necessarily being caught. There are also clubs, which I've been told about, that are reputed to fate members as heroes when they transmit their own acts of child sex abuse. Child porn that is relayed through the net is regularly used as a means of desensitizing children and normalizing sexual activity between adult and child. Children in that picture are often also depicted as smiling or in domestic settings such as the kitchen, which further normalizes the event for the kid who watches the event. So it becomes something that is the norm rather than the exception. To give you another example, supposing we are not very used to seeing two men kissing. I mean, I have a lot of homosexuals who I rate amongst my closest friends. Maybe I'd feel a little uncomfortable if I saw them kiss. Maybe if I saw them kiss over and over and over again, I'd kind of get desensitized and it would become the norm. I have a fairly good egocentricity. I'm fairly well centered, I'm fairly stable. Imagine a kid who's growing up. His hormones are playing up. He doesn't know whether his growth and development is going to be very good. He's bombarded with criticisms from his parents, his teachers, etc. His girlfriend may be growing taller than he is, woe and behold. Not surprisingly at that time, if you are faced with things which allow you to get desensitized in a way, then you'll end up becoming a piece of wood or a piece of stone, and things which would otherwise cause us to get upset, angry, dismayed, cause us to stand up and say, no, this is not permitted. Those things don't happen. So we're probably going to land up having a whole bunch of kids in our next generation who are actually cold, who don't care too much about things, who are frozen in a sense emotionally. And yes, maybe at the other spectrum you had a lot of excitement and people screaming and being dramatic, which also has its own disadvantages. But would you prefer to be dramatic or would you prefer to be a cold piece of wood? We have to see what works. What is the impact? It is acknowledged that the impact of watching porn on kids will depend actually on their developmental level and the kids' own reasons for wanting to watch such contents. Adolescents normally want to seek knowledge, they're curious and have fantasies about sexual activities. Even though sex education in a sense does happen in our schools and colleges, it may not be done in the best way in the world. It's usually very aseptic and it causes problems. I know that about 10 years ago I was invited to a shipping company. There was this marine college and the kids were having a whole bunch of problems. So the principal, who was a friend of mine, called me and said, just have a chat with them. They're giving us a lot of trouble with the behavior is off and so on. And while we were chatting, one of the things that came about was sexuality. So you had these 19-year-olds and they were talking about sexuality and they said, Doc, nobody ever talks to us. And it's like sex doesn't exist in India, but I mean, then you go through the whole thing of the Kama Sutra and all of that stuff, which all our kids talk about. One kid actually stood up and said, why is it that we cannot be taught how to use a condom properly? And I was a little startled, but I said, okay, what do you mean you're not allowed to use it? He says, can I demonstrate? He takes out his wallet, he takes out a condom in a classroom, in a college, and he says, Doc, this is what happens when I use it. And he was showing me something that was fairly inappropriate in terms of the usage of a condom. He says, you're a medical professional, can you tell me the right way to use it so that I don't make my girlfriend pregnant? Now, too much knowledge? Maybe. Too much information? Maybe. But what was I supposed to do? So I showed him the right way of using it. On his thumb, of course. The point is, sex exists. The point is, all our kids are sexually active. The point is, all our kids are curious. A lot of our adults are curious. We're so repressed, we're so restricted. I mean, it's ghastly at times, the kind of patients I get at the age of 40, 45, their basic knowledge of sexuality is terrible. The bottom line is, as long as there is sexual curiosity, and as long as there is some amount of repression in sexual norms, much better here than in the smaller, more facile cities in our towns in our country, but it is going to be a major issue. That's 5 minutes more? Okay. A sizable proportion, however, are reported to feel very upset by this exposure. Up to 23% in a 2000 study reported feeling at least one symptom of stress, either physical or that of intrusive thoughts. A non-consequence of kids viewing porn over the internet is desensitization to the material, like I said, which is a factor which is linked with children and younger people becoming sexually abusive to others. The recent rape victory, if you call it a victory in terms of the judgment, where the perpetrator, the worst perpetrator, is reputed to have been under the age of 18. Probably had a whole bunch of things happen to him, and probably that's why he became a horrible abuser as well. And a number of adolescent child offenders have been seen accessing porn as well. We have sexual violence on the net. There's something called snuff movies where the hero and the heroine actually die, they're killed. Sadism and masochism, episodes on the net of this, they can cause the child to accept a degrading view of women as the norm. And children do learn behaviors and values from the net, and hence are at a risk for developing an altered perspective on human relationships. They've also been found to have increased hostility, they may act out violently, they may display fear and anxiety symptoms as well. Children who become immune to violence can show greater hesitancy to call an adult to intervene in a violent incident and show less sympathy for abuse victims as well. And then we have child sexual tourism. Apparently there are some states in India also which have rampant child sexual tourism, and there is some proof that such activities are advanced by the internet, with facilitators assisting access to child prostitutes, their location, and the sale and trafficking. We also have harassment, the trolling of kids, cyber shaming, body shaming, and so on and so forth, which can cause harm or humiliation or embarrassment. And now we have this thing where you actually push the kid into committing suicide, which is a frightening thing that is happening in our societies as well. We also have kids who use chat rooms with multiple users, where the users adopt multiple identities and engage in playing games. And these kids can then lose the ability to distinguish between real life and simulation. This kind of impact on the kid is still in the process of being understood. We don't know enough as yet. An extended use of this may be associated with a decline in well-being and the development of depression and loneliness. The good thing about it is that it seems to be reversible if you can cut the kid off from using what he's using. Finally, there's a belief that many children may not actually transfer time from other media such as the TV to the net, but actually increase the overall time spent on using electronic media. So now the overall feeling is not whether there is an impact due to this, but it's the level of the impact. So what can be done? Community education programs for children, parents about internet risks, safe internet behaviors. I think we're already doing that to some extent. Development of watchdog organizations, we're doing that. Blocking of offensive sites, we are attempting to do that. Regulation of the internet industry, which is a voluntary code, that's not happening. Criminal prosecutions of offenders. Considering our courts are the slowest probably in the world, it's not really going to be very effective as a deterrent, so we have to figure out other things. This whole thing of the registry, which was talked about in the morning, I'm not getting into, and then we talk of treatment of the offenders themselves. As adults, we need to know that teens are accessing the net at more places than the parents realize, such as their friends' houses. Kids are putting personal profiles on the net even though we're telling them not to do so. A number of teens have their own private emails which their parents are not aware of. And more than half the teenagers are reported to have been corresponding with strangers. One must accept that kids and young people may be the source of much of the family's knowledge on the internet. Hence, it is critical that other preventive strategies are developed to safeguard kids. It is recommended that kids actually be a part of media production. That's one of the latest things happening, so that you enable them to engage in activities that are more meaningful to them. Okay, now there's a lot of stuff which I won't have the time for doing, but I just want to do something in terms of care of the caregivers, because we're all caregivers here, and I don't think we pay enough attention to this. As helping professionals, we are trusted with some of our clients' deepest, darkest secrets. Every day we are subject to heart-wrenching stories and horrible life situations of the individuals that come up to us seeking change and relief. Given how we are exposed to such stories and information on a day-to-day basis, it goes without saying that if we do not take care of ourselves, we can become prone to many kinds of health issues ourselves. Burnout, compassion fatigue, heart issues, depression, and suicide. So it's a big thing even for us. We must realize that if we are not in top form, we cannot expect ourselves to possess the capacity to care for our clients. So we'll end up having fatigue, and if it's left unattended, we can lead to an unintentional disservice to those who seek our help. Thus, we need to find a balance between the identity of a helper and the reality of being a human being ourselves. We must remember that even Superman had a weakness. And finally, I'd say this whole thing of clients' rights versus censorship. Opposition to censorship is entwined with the arguments relating to the merits or otherwise of censorship of information. And we all want that there should not be too much censorship. We believe that judicious censorship is needed to control the exploitative sides of society. Of course, it depends on the guy who's at the top of the helm. Others are going to say that you can't certify a movie because it shows the sexuality under the burqa. I mean, that's ridiculous. It is better to risk curbing a few adult rights to unfettered pleasure in order to protect the rights of children. Unfortunately, how the rights of adults impede on the rights of children is rarely asked. Thanks so much. You know, there's a lot of debate that is happening, even amongst us doctors. How much is too much? And I certainly don't want too much restriction. I think that we have the right, every child and every adult has the right to sort of uncensored material. But when the material includes things which are obviously degrading, illegal acts and things like that, then we already have the government who are blocking a lot of sites. Unfortunately, it seems that you block a site and about 10 come up instead. We also have this whole thing of the possibility of, just like you have rating of movies which are shown for distribution in cinemas, people are talking of the possibility of having a rating system for stuff that is shown on the net. Whether it works or not is a moot point. The point is at least people now are talking about it, which they never used to do in the past.
I I'm just curious to know, there are cases which are, which I deal in on an everyday basis. There are certain problems that kids are facing in schools, and though they have the child psychologist in the school also, counselor is there, but at times they're not able to, do full justice.
Sure.
But in case of specialized therapists, how many sessions do you think it requires to have solve a problem of internet addiction for a child? How many sessions on an average?
Okay, it's impossible to generalize, but by and large we do it in two ways. There's one where there is something called implosion therapy, where you kind of cut him off directly. It's like throwing him into the deep. So from seeing the net or whatever else, 8 hours a day, you just cut off access. You don't have Wi-Fi and things like that, which can be quite brutal, but at times is needed. And then you have something which is reduction on a gradual basis, which seems to be more humane and so on and so forth, but sometimes doesn't work. Depending on the various aspects associated with the so-called addiction, we'd suggest one or the other of the two, and then we take it from there. On an average, I would say at least about 15 to 20 sessions would be needed.
Right.
Not only for the kid, but even for the parents.
And in a span of what period?
Well, we see the child at least once a week.
I see. Do you think peer pressure works in this case? If in case you take internet de-addiction class for a group of 50 students and let them talk to each other about the benefits and all, rather than you just simply talking to them directly on a one-to-one basis?
Yeah.
Do you think there is a change?
We normally would. What has been known to work, and unfortunately I couldn't show some of those slides because of lack of time. What has been known to work is a combination of individual with group, more than individual alone and more than group alone. So one would work on a one-to-one basis as well as in a group situation similar to what you're saying. That seems to be more effective.
Thank you.
I'm just curious to know, there is some debate about whether we can call term it in addiction or is it excessive use. Based on your experience, which is a better terminology?
I'd say addiction. Because now we're actually finding even changes in the brain related to excessive use, similar to the kind of changes that we see there on drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. And we used to at one time say you would use only the desktop, which became cumbersome. I mean, you couldn't carry it all over. Then it became the laptop, then it became the iPad, and now on a small little thing you can watch it. So I mean, we have parents who come in and say at 3 in the morning I go in and he's lying in bed and he's watching something. It's becoming a really bad. And just like you have alcohol dependence and drug dependence and things like that, and you go through the withdrawals and you go through the agitation and the physical symptoms and things like that when you are attempting to give it up, and at times you need to give medication for the same to cope with the withdrawals. We are actually seeing things like that now so I'd call it an addiction. Thank you.